Welcome to Mountain Strong. Today we have come to Lake Eklutna. Lake Eklutna is one of 3 million lakes in the state of Alaska, but it is a very special lake to those of us who live here in the city of Anchorage. The reason it is so special is because this lake is actually the lake from which we draw all of our water. And so as you're driving up to this lake, you're coming past, down this windy road, past all these water treatment facilities. So all the water that feeds the city of Anchorage comes from this one lake. But I was very humbled to learn upon coming here that this one lake not only has the needs of the city of Anchorage met, it actually has the needs of all of Alaska met. There was one of those interpretive signs here at the beginning of the trails here that described that fact. And so all of the state of Alaska, over 700,000 people, or roughly 700,000 people, could be fed in terms of their water needs by this one lake. And again, there are 3 million lakes here in the state of Alaska. God has abundantly cared for His creation. And the fact that God has abundantly cared for His creation and also this setting here by a body of water is actually a wonderful way to kind of segue into the psalm that we're going to be studying today. Now, I have made a mistake the second time I've done this in, I don't know if it's 36 or 37 weeks of recording now. Didn't bring my Bible, but once again, I am saved by the fact that I have my Bible here on my phone, so you have to bear with me. A little bit less prepared than I would have been. I always have my little sticky note inside of the Bible, but at the same time, we're going to go ahead and read this psalm and reflect upon what it says. And so we're going to be looking today at Psalm 104. Let's go ahead and read that now. Bless the Lord, O my soul. O Lord my God, you are very great. You are clothed with splendor and majesty, covering yourself with light as with a garment, stretching out the heavens like a tent. He lays the beams of His chambers on the waters. He makes the clouds His chariot. He rides on the wings of the wind. He makes His messengers winds, His ministers a flaming fire. He set the earth on its foundations so that it should never be moved. You covered it with the deep as with a garment. The waters stood above the mountains. At your rebuke they fled. At the sound of your thunder they took to flight. The mountains rose, the valleys sank down to the place that you appointed for them. You set a boundary that they may not pass, so that they might not again cover the earth. You make springs gush forth in the valleys. They flow between the hills. They give drink to every beast of the field. The wild donkeys quench their thirst. Besides them the birds of the heavens dwell, they sing among the branches. From your lofty abode you water the mountains. The earth is satisfied with the fruit of your work. You cause the grass to grow for the livestock and plants for man to cultivate, that he may bring forth food from the earth, and wine to gladden the heart of man, oil to make his face shine, and bread to strengthen man's heart. The trees of the Lord are watered abundantly, the cedars of Lebanon that He planted. In them the birds build their nests, the stork has her home in the fir trees. The high mountains are for the wild goats, the rocks are a refuge for the rock badgers. He made the moon to mark the seasons, the sun knows its time for setting. You make darkness, and it is night, when all the beasts of the forest creep about. The young lions roar for their prey, seeking their food from God. When the sun rises, they steal away and lie down in their dens. Man goes out to his work and to his labor until the evening. O Lord, how manifold are your works! In wisdom have you made them all. The earth is full of your creatures. Here is the sea, great and wide, which teems with creatures innumerable, living things both small and great. There go the ships and Leviathan which you formed to play in it. These all look to you, to give them their food in due season. When you give it to them, they gather it up. When you open your hand, they are filled with good things. When you hide your face, they are dismayed. When you take away their breath, they die and return to the dust. When you send forth your Spirit, they are created, and you renew the face of the ground. May the glory of the Lord endure forever. May the Lord rejoice in His works, who looks on the earth and it trembles, who touches the mountains and they smoke. I will sing to the Lord as long as I live. I will sing praise to my God while I have being. May my meditation be pleasing to Him, for I rejoice in the Lord. Let sinners be consumed from the earth, and let the wicked be no more. Bless the Lord, O my soul. Praise the Lord. This psalm is unmistakably a praise psalm, a psalm in which the psalmist is reflecting upon the greatness of God. As you think about this psalm, you can't help but reflect upon one attribute of God, and that is His omnipotence, His all-powerfulness, the fact that He has power over everything. He has power over everything because He created everything. But it's humbling to see what our God did with the fact that He had all power. you ask that question, well, what would you do if you had all power? And oftentimes the things that we think about in the relaying of that answer are things that are minute. We think about maybe how we would help certain people, or how we would do certain things for our families, or even certain things that we might think would be better for the world. But the God of this earth, who created this earth, has on his heart and mind the orchestration of all of this earth so that it best meets man's needs. Not stated, of course, in this psalm is that the chief need on earth is for man to find God, and that is clearly woven into this psalm. You read this psalm and you reflect with me upon Romans chapter 1 and verse 20. The invisible things of God are seen from the creation of the world. God created this world not only to sustain this earth, but to sustain the souls of men. But of course, this psalm isn't reflecting upon that again. It's just reflecting upon God's creative ability and how that declares him to be such an awesome God and how he has ordered this earth. We reflect upon the first few verses, and the psalm opens up with just these statements that talk about the bigness or the greatness of God. And you see in verses 1 through 3 that God is so big and so large that the biggest things that the psalmist can use to describe his dwelling place, he uses those things. He talks about how God is covered with light as a garment, and of course his glory and majesty. But then he says he stretches out the heavens like a tent, and so the sky is his tent. But then the biggest thing that he can imagine, the bodies of water, they are the beams of his chamber, so to speak. And so the biggest thing and the biggest thing form the dwelling place of God. And of course, he knows that God is bigger than that, but using that language to try to evoke a response. When you've ever gone out into the ocean and seen the vastness of it, or stared at the sky, especially in a place not like this where the land is flat, and you've seen that big sky country that you have in Texas and other places, you see those big things, associate that bigness, that vastness with your God. Not only, though, is God bigger than the earth, but he is also bigger than the heavenly realm. In verse 4, it talks about how his angels are sent forth as a flaming fire, his ministers, it says there. And of course, from a New Testament perspective, we reflect upon Hebrews chapter 1, which says that those ministers of fire are actually sent out on our behalf, on the behalf of those who are going to inherit salvation. But the psalm reflects on the vastness of God, and then it reflects upon the vastness of one of those elements that it mentioned, the waters. And it describes how God, in his vastness and his greatness, is greater than the waters. In verses 5 through 9, it describes in poetic language one of two things. It probably depends upon how you view this psalm, which of those things it envisions. There was a brother who I was reading from, and as he was looking at this psalm, he made note of the fact that it seems to move forward along the days of creation, and that's an interesting observance. It certainly reflects upon maybe the sky in these first 4 verses, and then it reflects upon the water, and then, which is of course day 2, and the division of the water and so on, and then the land and how the plants care for this world, and then the creation of the heavenly bodies, and then the sea and the animals that are in the sea in particular. And so it does follow that pattern as the psalm moves forward. But when I look at these verses, I can't help but think of the fact that water is the greatest thing in man's existence, because water has done something that no other element has. When you think about fire and its destructive power, and we've certainly seen that here in Alaska this summer, I'm thankful that it's not too smoky of a day today, because we've had a lot of smoke from the fires down south and even also up north. Fire is awesome, but fire has never done what water has done. Water destroyed the world. And when I look at these verses, I can't help but think of what happened during the time of Noah's flood. The mountains rose, the valleys sank, and then finally those waters were given a boundary, and never were they going to pass beyond that boundary to cover the earth again, it says in verse 9. And that again is what makes me think about the flood. But whether it's talking about the water of creation and God dividing up those waters as he did, or it's talking about the water of the flood, God has shown himself the master of the thing that has once mastered all of this earth, water. But what does he do with his mastery? Again, what does he do with his omnipotence? In verses 10 and following, verses 10 through 13, he describes how God uses that water to provide for the needs of both man and beast. And what a blessing that God does that. We need water, and water is abundant. Our planet is covered by water. Now, we can't drink all of it, but you think about how much water there is relative to the needs of man. That one lake that's right behind me can feed all of Alaska and take care of it. God cares for us. As he moves forward, he describes the plant life and how that also is structured to care for man in verses 14 through 18. The plant life gives crops for mankind, but it also gives a home for the animals. God cares for all of His creation, and there's a reflection upon the tenderness in God that we sometimes see in ourselves, how we care for animals. God cares for animals and has provided homes for them in verses 16 through 18. But then in verses 19 through 23, He describes the heavenly bodies. And again, these great things in the imagination of man, how exalted and how powerful the heavenly bodies are, the sun, the moon, and the stars. The first thing that people turned to in worshipfulness from God was these things. But as we think about those things, they're very small in terms of their importance in God's creation. God created them simply to mark out time, it says in verses 9 through 23, and how wonderful He's done that. He makes the nighttime and the animals come out, and He makes the daytime, and then man goes to work. He has it perfectly structured. The needs of man and beast, again, cared for in the way that He created those heavenly bodies. He describes in verses 24 through 27 the powerfulness of the sea once again, but as it relates to this amazing reality that even the psalmist probably wasn't fully aware of, the ocean is full of life. He describes it here in verse 25, living things both small and great. The psalmist probably didn't go snorkeling or diving and see all of the tremendous bouquet of life that is down there. Everybody owes it to themselves to see an underwater documentary and have a look at some of the things that God has made down there, because all the things that we can see up here, boy, there's a whole lot more down there to behold. And again, testimony to our creative God. But He made all of these things, and again, taking care of the ships on the sea and the Leviathan or the sea creatures and all that is there. But He provides for them. He gives them food in their season. And as you think about our God, again, in this earth, He hasn't protected all of these things to the exclusion of death. In verses 28 and 29, He describes that cycle of life. But then He describes how God brings life back again in verse 30. The cycle of life does not trend towards death, it trends towards life. Life comes from death both in terms of plant life, animal life, and human life. We live, we have children, and the cycle of life continues. But God is in control and over all of that. The psalmist reflects upon the power and the glory of the creative God, and he says, wow, may the glory of the Lord endure forever. I don't want omnipotence, because I would never be able to do with it something as powerful and majestic as God has done with it. God alone deserves this power. He alone deserves this glory. And of course, as we reflect upon that, we can't help but say in verse 33, I will sing to the Lord as long as I live. I will sing praise to my God while I have my being. And as we think about these things, may we meditate upon them. May we reflect upon them continually. And may we purpose in our hearts to change. I love how this psalm concludes with that subtle reminder of the need to change. Let sinners be consumed from the earth and let the wicked be no more. Why would you waste this wonderful place of provision? Use this provision that God has given you to do anything but shape your soul for eternity. I can't imagine why you would want to, but so many people choose to do that. It shouldn't be. People should reflect upon the glory and the greatness of our God and determine to serve Him. And so, God has provided for you. Thank God for that. But reflect upon what that means about His power and His way of structuring this world, what that reveals about Him, His intent, His character, His nature. Think about these things, and may God bless you today.